All right, whether you're here in C.S. Lewis Square in Belfast or back home in the blistering hot humidity of Tallahassee, all right, welcome to this round of our pastoral devotionals. We are in C.S. Lewis Square, and behind us is the great lion Aslan. And this is part of the C.S. Lewis tour where we're thinking about a lot of his fictional works. And some people might say, well, the most important things that Lewis wrote were his apologetic works, Mere Christianity, Abolition of Man. But I want to make a kind of a case here that it's really only by reading the fiction of Lewis that we can best understand what he wrote in nonfiction. In a lot of ways, this works with scripture, right? So God didn't just zap a systematic theology book down for us to read that holds truth like an instruction manual. What did he do? He gave us stories. He gave us truths, but he also gave us stories to kind of illustrate them. And I want to read an excerpt from Mere Christianity, and then I want to show how this is illustrated in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So Lewis says this. He says, I'm trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about Jesus. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. And Lewis says, that is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on a level with a man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice, Lewis says. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. So that's a very famous passage from Mere Christianity. Josh Radell builds out his Lord, Lunatic, Liar apologetic from that. But what you may have seen before is this very idea illustrated in the Chronicles of Narnia. And I'm going to try to summarize it and quote from it just a little bit. So we're all familiar. Lucy has gone into the wardrobe and has come back and told everybody about this magical land from Narnia, and nobody believes her. But Edmund is particularly, pardon my French, a turd, and he is constantly picking on Lucy. Well, Edmund, by chance, finds himself in the wardrobe and meets Lucy there. Of course, Edmund also meets the White Witch and a whole bunch of other things. And so Lucy thinks, finally, everybody's going to believe me because Edmund is my witness. And so what happens when they get back to the wardrobe into England? What happens? Edmund does what? Sticks it in her gut, right? He stabs her in the back. And so this has perplexed everybody because obviously, up to this point, everyone would have said Lucy is the trustworthy one and Edmund is the whatever I just called him just a second ago, right? As my granny Mitchell would say, he was a booger, right? That's what she would call it. And so they decide, let's go talk to the professor, Peter and Susan, and let's see what the professor has to say. And let me read this little excerpt here. The result was the next morning, they decided that they really would go and tell the whole thing to the professor. He'll write to Father, and if he thinks there is really something wrong with Lou, said Peter, it's getting beyond us. So they went and knocked at the door, and the professor said, come in. And he leads them through a discussion, and this is what he says. Then he sat listening to them with the tips of his fingers pressed together and never interrupted till they had finished the whole story. And after that, he said nothing for quite a long time. Then he cleared his throat and said the last thing either of them expected. And here's what he said. How do you know, he asked, that your sister's story is not true? And Susan said, oh, but, and then she stopped. Anyone could see from the old man's face that he was perfectly serious. And Susan pulled herself together and said, but Edmund said they had only been pretending. That is a point, said the professor, which certainly does deserve careful consideration, very careful consideration. Here's the question. Does your experience lead you to regard your brother or your sister as more reliable? I mean, which is the more truthful? And Peter says, that's the funny thing about it, sir. Up till now, I'd have said Lucy every time. And what do you think, my dear? Said the professor, turning to Susan. Well, said Susan, in general, I'd say the same as Peter. But this couldn't be true, all this about the wood and the fawn. That is more than I know, said the professor, and a charge of lying against someone whom you have always found truthful is a very serious thing indeed. We were afraid it might have been lying, said Susan. We thought there might be something really wrong with Lucy. Madness, you mean, said the professor quite coolly. Oh, you can make your minds easy about that. One has only to look at her and talk to her to see that she is not mad. But then, said Susan, as she stopped, she had never dreamed that a grown-up would talk like the professor and didn't know what to think. And finally, he says, there are only 3 possibilities. And of course, he prefaces that by saying, what? They don't teach logic at these schools anymore, right? Either your sister is telling lies, or she is mad, or she is telling the truth. You know she doesn't tell lies, and it is obvious she is not mad. For the moment, and unless any further evidence turns up, we must assume that she is telling the truth. How masterful is that? So to put into story, narrative, illustration, what's an incredibly complex kind of idea of if Jesus, the Son of God. And he aims to show that while certainly Christianity is supernatural and certainly transcends our human categories of logic, it doesn't mean it's not logical. It's very logical. It makes complete sense. And it's just a reminder that God, who is the eternal God, supernatural being over the whole universe, whose thoughts we cannot fathom, descended down to us and just gave us stories, gave us the simplest of human illustrations to remind us and to teach us about who he is. So what's the moral of the story? Read your nonfiction.